Welcome to Across the Dietary Universe, a podcast where we bring experts along our voyage to discover the secrets of food and how it relates to each of our unique dietary profiles. We'll discover that when it comes to food, things are not necessarily as they seem. Honeycomb is a mobile app that works with your iPhone or Android device to help you find suitable food to eat at restaurants near you based on your specific dietary requirements. Pre-order Honeycomb today at get.honeycomb.ai. Thanks so much for coming on the podcast. I'm very excited to have you here. I have a quick intro, so I'm going to read through that for our listeners to get to know a little bit more about you, and then we'll jump into it because Ellen is an amazing person, a very interesting person, a colorful person, and most certainly someone who will have a lot of cool stories to share with us today. But Ellen Bayens is the founder of the Celiac Scene, the go-to gluten-free resource for Victoria, Vancouver Island, the Gulf Islands, and beyond. The Celiac Scene launched in 2009, and Ellen has truly built an online community revolving around all things celiac and good health. Ellen was also the vice president of the Victoria chapter of the CCA. She has been featured in Gluten Free Living, Allergic Living, and Delight Gluten Free magazines. And that probably doesn't do her justice, but is that a good enough intro to get started today?
Yeah, that's a good start. It's gluten-free all the time, everywhere I go.
Yeah, I remember we met in Victoria, and that was a really cool meeting right before COVID came along, right? That was February of 2020.
Yeah, we didn't know what was in store for us, and you had this idea. I didn't really understand it, but the more I learned about it, I thought, this is Celiac Scene on steroids. This is what I always wanted to be able to do for our community, and the Honeycomb app is going to do that.
It can never happen without the partnerships of people like yourself. Part of my pitch to investors is, what's the status quo? The status quo is people are going to local bloggers, people are going to local resources, people are actually making requests in Facebook groups and asking for recommendations there. And of course, it's great because it answers everyone's questions. But at some point, we have to cross the chasm as a community, whether it's celiac or allergies or, any form of diet, to make this all a little bit more automated and integrate into this beautiful digital world that we have. But everyone with dietary restrictions has been left behind. And so Ellen is really great because Ellen is, sort of helping cross that chasm. And you're doing whatever you can to cross that chasm, which is really nice.
Yeah, I would say I'm a celiac. I'm more particular than most celiacs, but that's what you've got to be when you're starting to do something. And that's what I admire about Honeycomb app. You really understand our celiac needs. And your most recent post on my resource was differentiating between gluten-free friendly, and celiac safe. And that's so important for our community. So the information that you have in the app starts out pristine.
We did not have it like that early on, but we spoke to celiacs and, we were just listening to what do you want? What is the information that's most important for you to have?
Yeah.
And then the task becomes, well, how do we get restaurants to share that information with us? And then how do we get everyone to interface with it? So I really have valued the relationship with you and also with especially the BC chapter of the CCA. Everyone's been very friendly. And at the beginning, everyone is a little bit, they're asking questions. They're saying, is this person legit? Is this company legit? Because how many, apps have come along that have attempted to solve this issue and just end up not getting the job done and causing, maybe more harm or at least distraction at the very least, rather than actually getting the job done.
And I think that's a function of the popularity of our prescription. Not too many peanut allergic people have a diet that the rest of the community is embracing. But we've had this love-hate relationship with popularity of our diet that people would like to embrace it. But we also have to keep that standard of what's really safe for us. So we love it when restaurants and manufacturers offer us gluten-free friendly or gluten-free safe options. But we need to step it at one next level. And I'm okay to ride that wave so that we have many more restaurants and products to eat.
Right. So let's take a step back then and see, because when we met, I know we talked briefly about how you got to where you are today, but I'd love to know how you began this journey and how you ended up starting Celiac Scene.
I heard recently, I love this, the pain point. It was my fear, my diagnosis and my fear of dining out that created the Celiac Scene. And that's the impetus behind a lot of businesses. But starting back, my mother was diagnosed with celiac disease 25 to 30 years ago, and we went to a support meeting at the Edmonton chapter, and we had a couple of dietitians who were experimenting with gluten-free bread. And believe me, at the end of that meeting, we
Mm.
were not too optimistic. It was pretty tough going for bread in the early days. And 25 years later, we didn't know that celiac disease was genetically mediated. I did not know that I was at higher risk of developing it. So that diagnosis was never on my radar until I moved to Victoria, got a new general practitioner. She did a complete physical, and there were some anomalies in my liver enzymes, which wasn't associated with celiac disease at the time. So for 2 years, she was watching my liver enzymes, and I was very into fitness and actually bodybuilding.
Mm.
So she thought I was using steroids or was a secret closet alcoholic, even though I had two young children at home. And ultimately, she ordered a liver biopsy to see what was going on with my liver. And this is a fantastical medical story, but I had a liver biopsy, but they pushed through my liver into my small intestine and pulled out cells from my small intestine that
Wow.
proved I had celiac disease. So I was discovered completely by accident. And in a sense, this is a testimony to the reason why 90% of celiacs are not diagnosed. There are just so many, I guess, rabbit holes that doctors pursue when we present with symptoms, whereas fundamentally, celiac disease can cause up to 50, 60 other related disorders. And we have,
Right.
they say, over 200 symptoms. So it's hard for general practitioners to zero in and say what it is. And of course, so many patients are going to the doctor and saying, I think I have a intolerance to gluten. So the doctors themselves are being inundated with the
Right.
gluten-free want-to-be's, and the ones who have celiac symptoms are not being properly addressed. So it's quite a quagmire right now.
So I know some people who go gluten free just to test it out, but then they end up liking how they feel when they don't eat gluten. Are these people are they useful
Yes,
for the celiac community, or do they ultimately like cause more harm?
they're very useful because they're the perfect example of what not to do, which
Uh-huh.
is, I don't blame them. First of all, I didn't even think I had symptoms. Who knows what's normal and what's abnormal in a
Right.
digestive, sense. So I didn't know there was anything wrong with the way I felt. But if you do associate it or experiment with going gluten free, what you're effectively doing is eliminating the trigger that the antibodies that we test for when we do a blood test. So this is very typical where someone removes the gluten from their diet, feels better, and then goes to their GP and says, I need a definitive diagnosis. There are advantages to being properly diagnosed. And the doctor says, well, then you need to eat gluten for 6 weeks before you have your blood drawn or have the endoscopy, a biopsy. And very few people are willing to do that because when you reintroduce gluten as a celiac, your symptoms become very profound. It's tough going.
Uh-huh.
So it would be nice if people, if they thought they had a problem with gluten, that they just request of their GP that they have the specific blood test for celiac disease.
I didn't realize that was the process. So of course you end up with a lot of people who don't get diagnosed.
Yes, a lot. And what's the difference if they're diagnosed officially or not? If a person doesn't identify as a celiac, they may not take the prescription, the gluten free diet, as carefully or as seriously as they need to. Someone like me cannot have any amount of gluten. But if you think that you're having a problem with gluten and it's a problem, but it's not the autoimmune diagnosis, you can cheat on Saturday night and have pizza. You can have share a toaster with someone in your family, and all of those things will still add gluten to your diet. And if you're a celiac, you will remain ill. And why is it important to be completely clear of gluten? Because our condition is an autoimmune condition, and we will become compromised progressively to ultimately develop other autoimmune conditions. We really need to stay gluten free.
I mean, I didn't know that initially when I was diagnosed with colitis that, oh, all of a sudden that you have this autoimmune, now now you're in a very fertile zone for acquiring other autoimmune conditions too.
Oh yeah, they like to stick
Yeah.
together. Yeah, we acquire them.
It's a little bit, disheartening in a sense because we have this education gap with many restaurants and many staff at restaurants where they either lump everyone together or they don't understand the differences or they think everything is, not real and in people's heads and it's a lifestyle and so on. When really, like, it's not even an education issue at this point. I mean, it is, but there will always be people who are celiac and people who are in the middle, kind of neither here nor there, and with no diagnosis, not sure if it's just an intolerance or it's a sensitivity, or they do have celiac, but they haven't been diagnosed because of everything we just said. And it's kind of hard because people in that transition point, how do restaurants distinguish that if the customer themselves don't know? So they're getting they might get misinformation directly from the customer, thinking it's education.
Oh, yeah. Are you a celiac maybe? Because you sure know what you're talking about. If it ever happens to you, you'll be fine. But yeah, that's the dilemma. And I completely understand. I've been vetting restaurants since my diagnosis, as I said, way back in the beginning of the introductions. I was concerned about where I could eat safely, and I used my position with the Victoria chapter to create a relationship with restaurants in Victoria. So I completely understand that it's difficult for them when it's a diet that's become popular. They need to make our meals as carefully as though we were allergic. So I don't mind when a server asks me, is this a lifestyle choice, or is it, they may call it an allergy, and I'm happy to call it an allergy so that they understand that they need to prepare my meal as carefully as they would with a shellfish allergy or a peanut allergy. I understand and respect that restaurateurs know how to address the needs of the allergic, and I fully understand and trust that they can take our needs into consideration. But there is a kind of a gluten-free fatigue that they're exhibiting, and in some cases they're actually antagonistic to a gluten-free request, that they're probably burned out. But I should say that celiacs have a very loyal commitment to the restaurants that they trust. They have a 96% loyalty rate. So if a restaurant can meet my needs, I will go there. I'll recommend it. And that's where I'll be taking my friends and family to dine at. So we're worth investing procedures in.
Most definitely. And look, I don't really understand people who make restaurants and don't want to cater to the general population. Like, you have different demographics in the general population. Like, it's not, if it's just meant for people who are perfect, I don't know that that's the right business to have, maybe make it a private club or something in that sense, where you have to like apply to get in.
That's right. Well, it's called the hospitality industry for a reason. And I think chefs and the owners of restaurants want to welcome people to their restaurant as we would welcome people to our homes, and we want to make them feel comfortable and at ease. And I think that is the underlying foundation of the restaurant industry. And they're doing their best under different circumstances, and certainly it's been tough on them during COVID. But I like to think of our relationship with the restaurant industry as a collaboration. We're working with them. When I go to a restaurant, I ask the server, I'm a celiac, I need 100% gluten-free meal. What can we, what works for you? What would work for me? They don't have to make an apple pie on the spot, but they're generally equipped to do certain things well, and that's where we start.
But it's not all doom and gloom, and things are getting better thanks to, a lot of the efforts, on your part, for example, especially in the local community. How has the celiac community changed then, like in the last decade?
Ah, I think life's gotten a lot better for us. I think people know what the word gluten means, celiac disease. Um, there are a lot more food options. The food is tastier. Menus at restaurants offer menus that are gluten-free, or they notate that things that are gluten-free. But with our diet, there's always the next person who's newly diagnosed. So it's a continuing progress on enlightening the newly diagnosed. And I think for those people, you learn how to eat at home. You learn how to work with your family and educate them. And the final frontier is to get out into the real world again and go to restaurants with your friends and family and do so in a way that you're comfortable with. That's a challenge. And certainly the restaurants who say, oh yes, we've got a gluten-free menu, that's great. That said, I would still ask a lot of questions.
Right. So, and we're not yet at a situation where the minute someone's diagnosed, it's a swift, seamless integration into hospitality and society, you know, the way it currently handles food. But maybe
Yes.
maybe we get there. I'm confident that it will happen.
Yeah.
Right.
So there are people who are new to the diet, and then this is where your app
Yeah.
comes in, new to town. So if you're in a new city, I am as helpless and dependent as any newly diagnosed celiac. If I'm in Winnipeg, where do I eat? If I'm in Toronto, if I go in Australia, how do I know what's safe? And that's where we need that leg up, their helping hand of an app like yours that I can trust has. And I'm not really sure how you do that. I'm wanting to learn more how you communicate with the restaurants and get their buy into what you're doing, because restaurateurs, they're a bit beleaguered and they consider themselves professionals, as they should, and here we are, the layman, telling them how to
Right.
make our meals. So it's a delicate dance that you have to work with the restaurants. But I have faith in your app that what you refer me to will be safe for me.
Well, I appreciate that, and I don't really typically plug Honeycomb too much in the podcast, but I will say this, that when we when
You
we
should.
met, that in Victoria, before COVID, we were selling our service to restaurants, and we were saying, hey, if you want to do this and you want to, you know, access the software that we've put together, then, you know, we're charging anywhere from $600 to $1,000 per year for you to do that. And of course, you get an economic benefit because it helps you organize your dietary information in one spot. It helps save time of your staff to answering all these questions. You could write clear there what your gluten-free items are, and you could also write if you had a dedicated gluten-free fryer. Like, everything is sort of organized in one centralized spot. But wait, it gets
You're
better.
talking my language, and I
Yeah.
can just guess what happened. Okay, go ahead.
What happened after that? I think you know, because I think we've had a conversation since. But we have now opened it up, and all the work that we've put into the software is now free for restaurants to actually onboard, and that has now, you know, opened the floodgates for. Hold on a second, we're getting extremely valuable software. It's going to save us time. It's going to help us bring new business, and it's easy to integrate. So there's no real downside for restaurants to get on. The only reason why they wouldn't want to do something like this is, you know, get back to me in a month. Maybe we're too busy right now, or we just don't like people with dietary restrictions altogether.
Yes.
And by the way, if that's the case, that's perfectly
Oh,
fine, because if I have dietary restrictions, I wouldn't want to go there to your restaurant and then find that out after I've already taken a seat.
exactly. Oh, I could tell you stories. No, if they're
Yeah.
antagonistic to us, no, we can give them a break and we'll eat elsewhere.
I've talked to many, many restaurants, and most restaurants are perfectly happy to do their best to accommodate, and they're really there for good reasons. But there are most certainly
Mhm.
places that, you know, too, that just have their hand up and say, no, no, no. In our pitch deck, we have this sign of, and we have a podcast actually discussing it, but in London, England, about 6 months ago, there was a sign in front of the restaurant saying, if you have any form of allergy, don't come in, right? And it's like that level
Oh,
of
wow.
discrimination towards
Wow.
people. So really, to me, I see this to a certain degree, and I've spoken about it before, as a social issue. It's maybe not the same as other civil social issues that we've seen, but it's certainly one that's not
Mhm.
really talked about. Like, is it nice to have the server make a, you know, backhanded comment as they're walking away from your table? Like,
Oh, yeah. And we have to trust that the server understands us and maybe even likes us. I want to be an ambassador for other celiacs, so I want to make it easier for them. But I agree with you completely. If a restaurant does not want our patronage, that's fine. The problem comes when they make
right.
notations of gluten free on the menu, and then they end up serving us food that isn't safe. And I had quite a horrific story, and I won't name the restaurant, but they were notating gluten free pasta on their menu. And I phoned. They were a new restaurant, and I had high hopes. And I just phoned and I spoke to the head chef, and he in fact boiled the gluten free pasta in the same water
Yeah.
as the gluten pasta. Like that couldn't be worse. And I said, well, he said there's no room in his kitchen for that. But I said, then don't mention gluten free on the menu. You can't
Yeah.
have it both ways. So it's when they feel they can accommodate us or go through the motions and aren't able to do it, that's where
Yeah. That's
we
very
really fall
frustrating.
into trouble. But it is a in a sense, that restaurant in London, it is a form of discrimination. but their bottom line will ultimately be affected because not only will celiacs not go, their friends and
Yeah.
family and as a group won't dine there. I think you've got to widen the funnel and try to welcome as many people as possible.
Even in terms of the gluten-free insignia, I find it, as someone who doesn't even eat gluten-free, but all day we're annotating things here. It's like, why I wish that if you had the GF icon or if you had the GF, insignia, why not then just have a 1-for-1? If you serve GF, make it celiac friendly, make it celiac safe. There's no, like, what's the point of living in the in
Hmm.
between?
Yeah, go
Right.
that
And I wish
distance.
that was a standard mandated
Hmm.
from the top down, but maybe we're not there yet.
Yeah, that's right. The
Right.
words gluten free on products has a legal definition in Health Canada regulations, and it can be enforced by the Canadian Food Inspection Agency. Things are a little bit looser in the restaurant industry because it's not, the ingredients aren't so clearly established, and I think that's where your app comes in. I don't know if you want to speak to it, but how does the honeycomb, how has it been seen as a tool by restaurants? Do they have, I don't know how they translate their
Right.
menu into the gluten-free
Yeah.
items that you are able to recommend. Is it easy for them?
With any new technology, you have an adoption curve, right? So some will understand it better than others, like the iPhone, right? Everyone uses iPhones now. At the beginning, it was the people who were very fervently, fans of Apple and, wanted a better.
Creative and intelligent.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And so, the creative and intelligent restaurants are really, taking a liking to this. And it is a hallelujah moment for them, most certainly. 100%, really, because people are calling, they're
Oh, that's
emailing,
good.
they're, asking any form of question all day long. It happens,
Mm.
especially to restaurants that indicate outwardly, like to some degree,
Mhm.
they're diet friendly. Like take like a vegan restaurant, a plant-based restaurant, a
Mhm.
health restaurant, a bowl-based restaurant. These
Mhm.
restaurants like are beacons in the community for people with any form of dietary restriction. So what happens is they end up getting a
Oh,
ton of
yes.
back and forth. And so what Honeycomb does is it just automates that back and forth. Their information's there, clear, transparent, disclosed in one spot, that the customers can
Yes.
interface with. So it saves a tremendous amount of
Yes.
time, and it showcases their diet-friendly items better than anyone else. And by the way, if you have a server answering the
Mm.
phone, that's limited by their availability and also the time of the day. Exactly.
And their
Honeycomb's a tool that,
training.
hey, if you're looking for a
Yeah.
restaurant at midnight for tomorrow and you're on your computer or whatever, the information is there. It's like you can make decisions outside of calling a restaurant. And these days with all these, other apps that we're using,
Mhm.
nobody wants to really talk to people and have a big back and forth conversation on the phone anymore. Like calling a taxi? No, it's call an Uber.
Oh yeah, that's very true. Oh yeah, that's right. I mean, I don't, we're having a podcast, but there was a number of emails to set this up. I wouldn't think to
Yeah.
pick up the phone and call somebody now. I mean, even friends and family, you make an appointment to talk to them. That is, it's valuable, and our society is more like,
Yeah.
let's see what I can find out online. And certainly the younger generation of newly diagnosed celiacs really embrace apps. But there are some gluten-free apps out there, but we don't know the reference point of the person who's made a recommendation. And having been in the industry now for 12 years, I know that some restaurants generate their own
Yeah.
reviews, horrible as that may seem. So what's data in, data out, and even if it's a good gluten-free restaurant review, is that person a celiac? Are they as
Yeah.
sensitive as I would need to be? Like, where's the reference points where you have calibrated it and you've become the barometer or the temperature? You have an arbitrary standard where they can meet you and put the information in, and be held accountable. But that allows me to really see into their restaurant, see what I'm able to order.
Yeah, and we've done our best with it, and of course it's going to continue to develop, but we just listen to the users. That's the number one thing, and we don't think we know better, but we just want it to happen. That's the number one goal of the company. So a question in the same topic of apps for you is, do you use Uber Eats? Do you use DoorDash? Do you use Skip the Dishes?
I'm of another generation where I have to look at my server and say, I'm a celiac. Less than what would bother a celiac would put me in emergency. So I need to look at my server. I'm trusting that he'll miss a gluten-free meal I ordered, because mistakes can happen at every transition point. Add a driver to that. Add food that comes to me in a container that I can't really say for sure is gluten-free. Personally, I have a problem with that, with my own safety.
Well, I mean, it's great. It's great that you're sharing that. I think for my experience, it's okay because it depends on where I am in my diet. I get sketched out. I don't really like trying a lot of new restaurants. There was a case actually here when Danny joined us at the office, and we wanted to order from Uber Eats some green curry chicken. We didn't know is that version of the dish like dairy free and gluten free. And so we were like, okay, coconut milk, it's dairy free, but we were not sure is there gluten in here. And so we actually had to call the restaurant and figure that out and then order the item. And to me, it's like, I still, why can't that information just be disclosed from the get-go? Like, why is it not a parameter in signing up to Uber Eats, in signing up to these platforms where there's a layer of, whether it's honeycomb or not, right? But a layer of disclosing your processes, disclosing your information, and then updating it every so often just to, be sure that this information is accurate and up to date.
It's accountability. Yeah.
Exactly. Like there is no accountability. And in fact, in the Uber Eats app, you have it's really just for show. The fact that they have an allergy friendly filter, it's going to show you restaurants that are allergy friendly, but what allergy? Like, is it shellfish friendly?
And
is
your app
dairy?
has, I think, 29 parameters. It's unbelievable.
Yeah, it's 29 parameters with the preparation method. So I find how Uber Eats have approached this, and DoorDash and Skip the Dishes, anything they do is an insult to injury, because at the end of the day, they care about pushing more transactions, and they don't actually care about taking a bit more time, developing the technology, and building that communication with restaurants at a specific reference point that people like yourself are comfortable with. Right? They just don't want to go into that.
Because that would filter out their revenue stream. Because if they are that discerning that some restaurants wouldn't be able to meet the needs and wouldn't qualify to be delivered in their app, it's all about, ultimately, it's about the revenue stream. But I have an opposite story. I have a restaurant in Victoria who is extremely careful, and they are very bold in saying that their items are gluten-free. They wanted to embrace the delivery apps, and they could only be allowed to say gluten-friendly. And that was an insult to them, because they're not gluten-friendly. They're gluten-free. And they introduced me to one of the apps to make a case for that restaurant, to say, there's got to be a better category than that, because it actually dumbed down the caliber of their food, and they were uncomfortable with it. But in order to offer that delivery service to their diners, they had to use that terminology, which underserved them.
Yeah. It's just a matter of not putting in the effort. The truth is, Uber, DoorDash, these companies, they could take, $50 million, $100 million even, put it into R&D over the course of 5 years and, figure this thing out and get it done and make it economical.
Do you foresee Honeycomb working with one of these delivery brands? I think that's your next frontier.
Yeah, I mean, look, we're figuring out the model and figuring out the processes that work for everyone. That's and then future. At some point, it's going to merge with one of these at some layer, but it doesn't have to even be necessarily a business relationship. But we are, in the current state of the app, we are the layer. We are the in-between. We verify, we check, we get it done. And then you can, by the way, order through Uber Eats, order through DoorDash, right? We'll send you there after we've done our job to confirm. At the end of the day, yes, there is still the restaurant, themselves having to deal with it. And if you're very, very cautious, call the restaurant if you haven't been there before. Do your due diligence if you have to. But man, we're gonna be a lot more helpful than Google to helping you get.
Yeah, it's all about integrity.
Path. But I don't want to pitch Honeycomb too much more. I want to get to know still more about you, and I think
I feel like I'm on a date.
Would love that too.
Thank you.
I don't like to talk about myself too much on a date anyways, because that would be, it's like, it's fun. You have two people who are like not trying to talk about themselves, and it's like pulling teeth. And what's fun though is you end up talking about topics that interest both of you that you aren't necessarily, it's not one-sided. So anyways, I feel maybe we're in the middle.
That's how you
anyways.
learn.
We're giving dating advice and celiac advice.
That's right. Well, that's a whole other concern, is dating with celiac disease.
Right.
Because when do you bring it up?
And
I don't
when
know.
do you
And then
bring it
there's a
up?
whole
What's
issue.
the
They have
answer?
it. I just published on my website, the Celiac Scene, a study about how dating. We are more anxious dating when we bring it up. Some people, instead of addressing it with the server, they just eat a gluten meal, and. But then the head researcher said there hasn't been enough study on dating and kissing celiac disease. Is it safe to kiss a person who's had
Oh,
a beer or a sandwich? Like, and he actually said that is worth more study. So where do you sign up for something like
interesting. Interesting. Never thought of
that?
that. I never thought of that at
It's
all.
on our
Wow.
minds.
That's definitely a good point to make. And when to bring it up? I mean, when do you bring up anything like that? With my colitis, I can't even recall if I probably wouldn't bring that
Oh
up on a first
no.
date,
And yet
really.
we date in
I don't think so.
restaurants, and right up front, we're going to have that
Yeah.
conversation. So what I typically do is I phone the restaurant ahead of time and work it out on the phone to see what they can offer. But if you're spontaneously going out for dinner, or you want to go to some kind of fair where there's nothing to eat at all, but I think in this day and age, people can say, I think people
Yeah.
are pretty hip. The younger generation are, yeah, I have celiac disease, I can't have that. I think it's becoming more acceptable.
Yeah. I think so. Yeah, I think so. I think for myself, I might not say, because mine is not necessarily directly related. Like celiac is gluten free, but colitis is like, well, any number
Yes.
of restrictions. So I might just say, hey, I don't
Oh,
have
yeah.
dairy, I don't have this, but I
Yeah.
won't say I have colitis. But I guess with celiac, you kind of want the person to know that not
Yeah.
only do I not eat gluten, it's got to be a
Yeah,
safe
that's
place
right.
for me to
That's
eat.
right. And in a sense, we're all ambassadors for our disease and awareness. So I have no problem saying I have
Right.
celiac disease, and I'm ready to talk to anybody about it.
People should be confident in their diagnosis, but it takes time to become confident
It
in that, because
does.
sometimes it's embarrassing at the beginning too.
Yes, it is. And that's where I'm quite grateful to the diagnosis. I always say there are so many silver linings to the disease, but it helps you to learn how to be assertive, find your people. I have a foodie meetup group. Challenge that we face is having our family members understand. Some of us have been sick for a long time, and we're sort of grasping at diagnoses, and then finally we say we have celiac disease, and they're saying, oh, now she's got celiac disease. Or they want to be really helpful and make a meal for you. But I generally don't eat meals from people who are not celiacs. There's so much to consider. So the support of other people and learning how to navigate your new life the support is really helpful. But that's part of the. It's easy enough to stop eating gluten. It's like how to you've landed on a new planet that's kind of hostile to you, and you have to recalibrate your perspective.
Yeah, it's interesting. We're getting there. Everything is being digitized and filtered. How has technology helped you with some of your challenges? Like, I know that there's these sensors and stuff out there. Have you tried any of those before?
No, I have some concerns about those. I'm not sure if you've talked to anybody about it, but I come from a medical lab background. So if I am presented with a meal and I'm going to put a small sample of the food into the testing tube and watch for the reaction, I mean, I'd have to homogenize and blend the entire
Mm.
meal. There are going to be gluten hotspots that could trigger a low result or a high result. I think ultimately it's your ability to communicate that transcends testing in any case, and really empowering a person to know how to ask those questions. I really am at the grassroots level. That said, I can see that an app that has asked those questions on my behalf in advance is something that I can trust. But I'd have to really have some experience with the app, and that's why I think your preliminary, your sort of a pre-launch proposition is an excellent deal, because then we get a chance to see how it works and then trust it. I used to think that the celiac scene, when I started this resource, it was after we had a conference here, and the chapters from all across Canada had their little lists of restaurants that they trusted, and then um, I made a list for Victoria. So when they came to town, they could go to about a dozen restaurants downtown that we trusted to be safe. So it was the beginning of what you're doing so well right now. And then at that point, I think there were 29 chapters across Canada, and they said, could you put our restaurants in a resource so that we wouldn't have to tell everybody, or anyone out from out of town could find out the places we trust. So more or less, That's how the Celiac Scene was born. A year later, I'd had all the restaurants from across Canada that local chapters trusted. So that was quite innovative at the time. The apps I don't use as much as a younger generation of celiacs use. And I think you've just taken it to the next level. Facebook groups are great. You get the truth in these groups. They're closed groups. I think for the BC chapter has, you can ask that question. You can say, I had a bad experience at a restaurant. Being able, the free association of sharing of information is great. But also, who's saying this? Like, can I trust everybody who comments in that?
Yeah, that's the issue, because every amazing product or every amazing restaurant that I've been to, every amazing product I've used has someone who had a bad experience with it. And, you have this, spectrum of reviews from different people. And if I look at it and it's like, do I trust this person? Do I not trust this person? Do I trust the person that gave it 5 stars? How do you know that this person is really trustworthy? Like maybe, if they hate your favorite movie, like, are you still going to trust that person?
I only talk about one thing: if they can serve us consistently safe and hopefully delicious meals. I think the apps are helpful in terms of, you're scanning through pretty good reviews, but then I would still take those extra steps of, calling ahead or asking the server specific questions. You never know, things can, I find what happens too when you're talking to a server, when you say, if I say I'm a celiac and I'm also allergic, they get a little bit worried. They don't want to commit. They're a little bit, they might be concerned that they may be overselling themselves. But I think if you go back and forth, it doesn't take too many questions before you get the sense of what they're comfortable with and how safe you are. If they oversell themselves, so that's the problem. I think what you're doing though, you're getting really into the bushes with the restaurants. I don't know how. I'm really curious to know what those conversations are like, and are they conversations or are the restaurants self-analyzing? Is it just who's monitoring?
It's a bit of both, right? So and not one or the other, but both. So you have initially the conversations to get them signed up onto this, right? And the conversations to get them signed up is like, okay, you gauge their understanding already. Then in the onboarding process, the parts that are automated come later, but
just
the initial parts are
right.
Okay. Just select where you fit in, okay? And you can decide, by the way, you can be on Honeycomb and not be accommodating to anyone except like vegetarians, and that's totally fine. If you're not comfortable with this, be very honest now. You're not, because I'm going to bring you people here who might die.
You're not prescribing.
If you serve them
you're
the
just
wrong thing.
asking.
So we try to scare them from the beginning and then see where they're comfortable with. Then it goes into the ingredient disclosure process, which, our AI helps a lot with that, and their chefs and so on have to verify the information, and then that is then verified again over time. So they have to check in with it because sometimes the processes change. They introduce a new dish and they're no longer friendly to that allergen that they said they would be. We have a system where, okay, how often do you update your menu, right? Right. So we know, okay, if there's a menu update, we have to go through the process every time there's a menu update. Right. It's not
good.
So it's not just like you do it one time and then you're the last time you engage with Honeycomb was 2 years ago. It's like, no, it's like every time you update your menu, you engage with Honeycomb. It all comes down to this, Ellen. You have menus, right? You have menus that are stale. They are text, they are PDF files, they are image files. You know this experience. You go to a restaurant, there's a QR code, you scan the QR code, and you're downloading a PDF menu on your phone. And now you have this PDF menu, you have this file, and you're zooming into it in order to see what even are the items here.
You may as well get a stone template. It just doesn't
make sense.
Yeah.
It's almost...
It's written in stone.
Yeah, you might as well have them with two tablets, stone tablets, by the way, not iPads, but... so it's very, very archaic. That technology is so old. And the fact of the matter is you have all of this data. If you take a tagliatelle pasta, just in that name, you have data. You can infer gluten. You can infer wheat. You can infer high carb. You can infer egg because it's an egg noodle, right? It's like there's so much data in there. Why is it stuck? People, a huge portion, 38% of the population have dietary restrictions. They want to interface with that data. why not connect it together? And by the way, not even just for dietary restrictions, for preferences. Maybe you love portobello mushrooms and you want to, find restaurants that have portobello mushrooms in a sandwich.
Yeah. It's literally a recipe for success. So I'm curious, what have you learned? What are some of the things that you didn't realize?
Like, what is my main learning from restaurants or from the startup?
Yeah, from, let's say, the two together. Let's start with the restaurant since
Yeah.
that's our
Okay.
topic.
So,
But what did you
well, as
learn?
far as selling to restaurants, we can still sell to restaurants. We just want to get, this going faster, right? We want a better conversion. We want this to actually happen. We're not just interested in making like a lifestyle business. We want it to actually solve the problem at a big scale.
Yes.
If you look at these big companies, Airbnb, Uber, Amazon, whatever it is, even Facebook at the beginning, their goal was not to like monetize immediately and like become profitable after 1 month or even 1 year. The goal was, how do we infect the population? And that's maybe a bad word given the times that we're in. That's really what they wanted to do. They're like, this is something that is going to help a lot of people. It's going to improve a lot of people. And by the way, like people have things to say about Facebook. People have things to say about Uber, about Amazon, whatever, but they do help a lot of people because that's why we use it. It's very convenient. And so they were worried about that. So that's kind of how we're shifting our mindset to, okay, forget about selling to restaurants. If restaurants want a premium product, we have that. We have extra data we can, they can access. We have customizations that they can do, but ultimately we just want this to exist. And the big learning for us has been not to take anyone or any restriction or any, problem for granted.
Don't diminish.
Everyone has their own specific case, and that's why the R&D process has been so long, because how do we deal with halal? How do we deal with kosher? How do we deal with a tree nut allergy? How do we deal with a vegan who has a tree nut allergy?
You're listening and learning.
Plant-based folks, there's no medical condition for the most part, right? It's ethical. But you know what? The ethical to some has enough of a gravity as an allergy is to some other people. Because if you see by accident cheese in your burger, if you accidentally taste cheese or taste beef or taste one of these things, that is traumatizing because you maybe haven't had it in 15, 20 years.
Yes. And how could they have let that happen if you've asked for a vegan meal?
And can you imagine if we do that to them? It's like, that's not a good look if we end up, giving them that experience.
I think you've learned to be sensitive to, you started out with your own health journey, but you've become more sensitive to respecting the needs of other people and how unique we all are in what we want when we eat and when we dine out.
We all have, YouTube recommendations, right? How many weird things do we all watch on YouTube that only we, the combinations of things that we watch? And it's like, that's great. That's great. Even Netflix, like, we're meant to be particular. We're meant to have preferences. And this is just an industry that hasn't really matured in the same way YouTube has.
Yeah. But I wonder if they can be that nimble. Technology, you can move things around on your computer, but actually, buying the ingredients, promoting it, working out the price point. Running a restaurant is not something I would necessarily want to do. And you've got staffing. That, I think, is the hardest part for restaurants, is staff.
Kudos to all the operators out there that put in a ton of work and literally blood, sweat, and tears into making it happen. And a lot of them just do it because of the passion. And so, I have a huge respect for people who operate restaurants. Without them, we wouldn't really have, so many of our good times, good memories, places to go for different events. So shout out the restaurants for sure. When did celiac become, I guess, more popular in terms of the diagnosis? Like,
it was discovered in the 50s after the war, when the Dutch population went from potatoes to bread. The children, there wasn't celiac disease as long as we were mostly eating potatoes, but as soon as bread became back available, the children became ill.
Wow.
So that was the association. And then I think in the 80s or 90s, and really I should know this better, but they developed the pre-screening blood test, and that took off. But the doctors aren't embracing that. They're not. The doctor has to think celiac disease before he orders that one blood test. It doesn't come up when you're doing your iron and and all of those things. So that is
Yeah.
the barrier.
We could have had that.
Yeah.
I don't know if you heard of, this is a fun one to end with, but Theranos. Have you heard of Theranos? Elizabeth Holmes, the first female billionaire out of the Valley, startup founder billionaire, that ended up being an entire scam. Because
Oh yes, that's a podcast.
yeah, I guess it's been on many
Yeah.
podcasts for sure. That's a cool
Yeah.
one because she was
Mhm.
trying to figure out, just with a pinprick of blood, you could run many, many tests, the same tests as if you were to take an entire, I guess, vial of blood. And it
And
wasn't
that
wasn't
wasn't true, or it was true
at
at
all.
all. Oh my.
Yeah,
Oh
I don't
my
know
goodness.
how many
Yeah.
hundreds of millions or billions that she raised. Yeah, a lot of people got scammed. But if
For
that
that.
was the case, and if it was that easy to get tested,
Mhm.
it might be a
Mhm.
lot better for all of us, right?
I think the genetic testing is
Yeah.
getting close, because it at least tells you if you're predisposed
Oh, it
to it.
does. The genetic test does that.
Star Trek's not that far
Oh,
away.
interesting. I didn't realize that the genetic test actually tells you if you're predisposed to celiac.
Oh yeah, there's a
Good.
genetic test, and they know. See, it's a beautiful autoimmune condition in that they know which genes you need to have in order to develop it. If you don't have those genes, it's very unlikely. But you can tell 30 to 40% of us have the genes, but we don't know why some of us develop it and some don't. But you can exclude it as a diagnosis. If you don't have the genes, you can never develop it.
Oh man, the genes.
Lots to
There's a
lots to
lot.
talk about.
Hey Ellen, this was awesome.
You're charming. Great conversation, and yeah, a lot nice back and forth, and I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, I enjoyed it as well. Like I didn't feel like work. It felt just like we're hanging out.
Yeah, let me know if I can help you in any way. I'm a fan. I believe in what you're doing.
Yeah, I really appreciate this conversation. I look forward to the next one.